Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Risk Modeling Hub. Today we'll understand a fundamental concept in banking risk management, default definition in banking, and specifically we'll explore the critical question, when does a loan default? This is video 7 of our comprehensive 100 days of ECL mastery series where we'll cover ECL, PD, LGD, EAD models and validation techniques. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what constitutes a default from a regulatory and a practical banking perspective, and why this definition is so crucial for accurate risk modeling. So, if you haven't watched my previous videos yet in this series, please check out my channel or click the link in the I button. Now, let's get started. The core issue is that banks face a critical choice: use regulatory definitions or portfolio calibrated definitions for default. This decision directly impacts how they calculate credit losses and expected defaults. So, from regulatory definition perspective, a loan is officially in default when either it satisfies like 90 days past due, that the borrower hasn't paid their obligations, or unlikely to pay (UTP). There's reasonable doubt the borrower can repay without selling the collateral. So different regions have slight variations. For example, the EU allows 90 days plus a materiality threshold, while the US is stricter at 90 days for most consumer loans. The regulatory baseline is just the floor, and your real portfolio data tells a different story. So three practical approaches refines this. First is the roll rate analysis. It shows where borrowers actually default. So you might find your real point of no return that isn't at 90 DPD, but earlier or later it can be. Vintage analysis. It confirms your threshold, it stays consistent across different loan origination periods. Data driven calibration. It adjusts the default definition to match what your portfolio actually experiences. So basically, default definition is the single biggest driver of probability of default, which directly feeds into the expected credit loss calculations. You move the DPD threshold and you shift everything downstream. ECL changes, loan loss reserve change, and IFRS 9 or CECL compliance is affected. So the bottom line is that you just don't have to follow the regulation. Tune your definition according to your data. So let's say imagine you have 100,000 unsecured loans. You keep the portfolio identical. Nothing changes except when you decide a loan is in default. So here what happens. At 60 days past due, you flag 5,800 of accounts as defaulted early. Your PD shoots up to 5.8%, but you catch problems sooner. So losses are smaller, LGD drops to 38%, and total reserves goes to approx 54 millions. At 90 days past due, the regulatory baseline, 4,200 accounts default. PD moderates to 4.2%, but you have waited a bit longer to intervene. LGD rises to 45%, and the reserves goes to approx 47.3 million, and it is lowest. At 120 days past due, only 3,100 of the accounts cross the threshold, and your PD looks artificially low at 3.1%. But now you are intervening too late. Your LGD jumps to 52% because more damage is done here, and the reserves goes to 41.6 million. So earlier triggers look worse on paper, that is higher PD in this case, but they are actually healthier for your business. You catch problems sooner, recover more, and lose less per account. Later triggers artificially compress your PD numbers while your actual losses grow. So the equation that we have seen so far is ECL is equal to PD multiplied by LGD multiplied by EAD. And the default definition sits inside this equation. It determines which accounts feed into PD and which LGD experience you see. So the practitioner rule is that calibrate to where your roll rate cures probability actually collapse, and not where the regulation says that you must choose this. And that's where the real risk lives. So you have to be very much careful. Now, regulators, let's say, give you a very simple rule: 90 days past due is equal to default. But in reality, that rule breaks down constantly. And here's why. Seasonal businesses, that is the false alarm. Agricultural companies and seasonal retailers, they deliberately skip the payments in off months. It's their business model and not the distress. A rigid 90 DPD rule flags them as defaulted when they are actually healthy. So for this, the fix is that you need to build seasonal payment schedules into your models so you don't penalize the normal cash flow patterns. Next is the restructured loans, the gray zone. A borrower can't pay, you restructure the debt, extend the term, and lower the rate. So technically, they have triggered an unlikely to pay event, but you have restructured them into recovery and not default. Basel treat this as a default. Your data says it's a cure. So you are caught between regulatory definition and portfolio reality. Next is the payment holidays, the regulatory precedent. During COVID, regulators granted the blanket payment holidays without triggering the default. Your data shows borrowers are healthy, your DPD counter shows 120 plus days. And this precedent proves that regulators themselves don't follow the 90 DPD rule when it doesn't make the sense. Geographical differences. The EU allows 90 DPD plus a 1% of materiality threshold. The US allows 0 DPD for some consumer products. India uses different SMA classifications, and you can't use just one definition globally. You need to be jurisdiction specific calibration. Operational and data constraints. Multi-system environments create ghost areas, partial payments that don't clear instructions instantly, and UTP, meaning the unable to process. This flag sits in the queues. Your DPD counter doesn't know if any account is genuinely defaulted or stuck in the operational limbo. So for here, the real lesson is that the default definition isn't just a regulatory checkbox. It's a policy choice. So you should document your logic, validate it against your actual data loss, and stress test it through all the crisis situations, and so that you can defend it to your auditors. And that's how you survive the scrutiny. So the default definition is a policy choice and not just a rule. Document the rationale, validate with portfolio data, stress test through scenario crisis, and keep the audit trail tight enough to defend to the regulators. So now, what this is? This is the roll rate analysis, which is the forensic tool that answers the questions that regulators can't. So at what point does delinquency becomes irreversible? And instead of guessing, you measure through some steps. First, you map the journey. You start with clean accounts and you track them monthly as they age. Then you build the transition matrix. Like for every account in 30 DPD this month, where does it land the next month? You then measure the cure versus the deterioration. You plot the roll forward accounts against the roll backward accounts, and then there is a curve that will tell you the story. You then find the point of no return, which is our step 4. So that collapse point is your true default of threshold. Next is the forecast forward. You use Markov chains to project if a current roll rates hold and how many accounts will get default in next 3 to 6 months ahead. So the output is that you have replaced here the regulatory guessing with the portfolio evidence, and your default definition now rests on data and not just simply copy pasted. So the core concept is about what exactly is roll rate. Basically, it answers like one of the borrowers, let's say sitting at 30 to 59 days past due right now, what happens to them in the next month? So basically, some will cure and go clean, some will stay stuck, and some will sink deeper. So roll rate quantifies those flows. Think of it as behavioral segmentation. Early delinquency, like 30 DPD, often looks chaotic. Borrowers cure, relapse, cure again. That's a noise. But as accounts age into deeper buckets like 90 plus DPD, this pattern stabilizes. Fewer cure, more and more default. So roll rate exposes that tipping point where borrower behavior shifts from recoverable to terminal. So basically it reveals 3 things. First, the behavioral insight, which shows you the truth about your borrowers. You will discover that your 60 DPD accounts cure at 40%, but your 90 DPD cure only at 5%. Second is the default definition. This becomes empirical rather than arbitrary. Instead of accepting just 90 days is equal to default, you use roll rates to find where the recovery probability actually collapses. Maybe it's 75 DPD in your portfolio, or maybe it's 110 DPD. So that will data will tell you, right? Third is the forward forecasting, which becomes possible. If you know the monthly transition rates between the buckets, you can project. At current roll rates, we'll have 15%, let's say, default in 6 months. So from all these 3 points, you move from defending a regulatory checkbox to defending a data-backed question. And auditors and regulators, they respect when they see all these evidences. So now let's understand the delinquency progression flow. Every loan follows a path. It starts healthy, the stage 1, the performing, and if a borrower misses the payment, they enter the stage 2, 0 to 29 DPD. From there, one of the two things will happen. They cure and go back to the performing, or they will sink deeper. Now, stage 2 through stage 4, these are the warming zone. At 0 to 29 DPD, most borrowers are just late. By 30 to 59 DPD, you are seeing a genuine friction. And at 60 to 89 DPD, the borrower is clearly struggling. These stages are reversible if the borrower gets cash or restructures. Stage 5 is 120 plus DPD, and it is the point of no return. Stage 5 is the 90 to 109 DPD, and it is the regulatory default zone. And stage 6 is my 120 plus DPD, which is the point of no return. Here, very few accounts recover here, and the borrower has either disappeared or is in very deep financial distress. And stage 7 is the write-offs, which will come next. So basically, roll backward or the cure means that the borrowers paid, got restructured or recovered. The account improves to a safer bucket, and roll forward means the deterioration, that is, the borrower misses the payment again or made only partial payment, and that's why the account risk rises. So these stages aren't evenly risky. Movement speeds up at the boundaries. An account that stays at 0 to 29 DPD for months then suddenly accelerates through 60 to 90 DPD. Maybe it then gets stuck at 90 plus DPD. So this is basically an uneven flow where you have to find your true default threshold and not just where the regulation says. But where your data shows accounts stop coming back is your finding. Now let's define our delinquency buckets. Before you can measure the transitions, you need clear states. You can't track movements if you don't know what the buckets are. And this step is boring but critical. And it's your data skeleton. So the standard structure is like that: you need to start with clean or performing state where no payment is due, account is in good standing, and this is your baseline. And everyone else is measured against this. Then slice this delinquency into the progressive buckets: 0 to 29, 30 to 59, and so on. The one that we have discussed in the previous one. Now the color coding, if you can see towards the right, it is basically intentional. So green means safe, and yellow to orange means that stress is bit increasing, and red means terminal. So this visual hierarchy helps the stakeholders understand the risk intuitively and without just reading the numbers. And have you ever thought about that why only these specific boundaries? So the 30-day increments, they aren't arbitrary. They align with the how the payment system works. That is, most bills, they recycle monthly, and how borrower behavior shifts. So you will find that the accounts behave differently at 29th day versus the day 31st and versus the day 60th. And these buckets capture those behavioral shifts. So you might customize this for your portfolio. Mortgage portfolios use different buckets than auto loans. Credit cards move faster than installment loans, but the principle stays the same. Create buckets granular enough to see transitions, but broad enough to have statistically significant sample sizes in each. And month by month, snapshots of how many accounts sits in each bucket is what we need. That data feeds everything downstream: your migration metrics, your roll rates, and your default threshold. Now we need to collect the historical data. You can't build roll rates just from the snapshots. You need the history, 24 months minimum. Because delinquency cycles aren't instant. A borrower enters 30 DPD, stays there for weeks or maybe cures, or maybe deteriorates. and 1 month of data is just a noise, and 2 years of data can bring the pattern. So you can just start with the six required fields, like the account ID, which is your unique identifier, origination date, which tells you where the when the loan was born, the month on books or the MOB, which will tell you how old the loan is in months. MOB1 means the first month after the origination, and so on. Monthly delinquency status. This is the heart of it. The DPD bucket that we have seen as of month end for each of your 24 months minimum of the status. And this is what it will create the progression. Now, payment status. So you need to know, was the payment paid in full amount, partial, or missed? And this will help you distinguish the genuine deterioration from your system. Charge off information. These accounts that exited the portfolio, written off or recovered, and you need to know where they landed, right? And you should need to note a point like why 24 months. This is because that shorter periods they can miss the seasonable patterns and full delinquency arcs, and longer periods are better, but 24 is the practical minimum to capture the cures, deteriorations, or the write-offs. And if your portfolio is very young, very new, so start collecting now, because this will become your foundation. Now let's count the customers per bucket at the time T. So take a single month, let's say month 12 in this example, and asking right now how many accounts are in each delinquency state. And this is your snapshot, your baseline. Everything you measure next will be the transitions from this point. So you are not just averaging across 24 months, you are freezing time at that month 12 and building your migration metrics from there. So this month 12 becomes your capital T, the time 0. And next month becomes T plus 1. The month after becomes T plus 2, and so on. So here you are tracking, let's say of the all 40,000 customers clean accounts today, how many are still clean in the next month, or let's say how many out of them will slip in the 0 to 29 bucket, and so on. So in this particular example, we can see the total is 50,000, right? So you have 50,000 active accounts at the month 12, out of which 80% are clean, and these are your healthy portfolio. 12% are in early delinquency, and the rest of the portfolio stages in each of the delinquency state. So if you look at a bit right, the portfolio distribution visual bar chart, so that green bar dominates here. The portfolio is mostly performing, but notice the silver of a red at the very bottom, the very thin lining. This will tell it that very 1% at the 120 plus DPD, this represents that they are nearly written off. And in a short portfolio of 50,000, that's a meaningful loss. So if your portfolio were 50% clean and let's say 30% in default, you would know something is structurally wrong. Either your underwriter is broken or economy is in free fall. And this is a 80-12 or 8 split, because 80 is clean and rest are the little deviations. Now you need to take this same 50,000 accounts and ask, 1 month later, where did each person go? And that's where the roll rate comes into the picture. Now let's understand that we have to understand this. Where did the clean cohort move? We didn't know the 40,000 customers which are in the 80% of the bucket. So when these accounts were tracked here, we looked at what the reality of what happened. 89% of the customers stayed clean, and these are our stable borrowers, out of which 8% they got slipped into the 0 to 29 DPD, typically the early bucket slippage. 2% of the accounts they deteriorate further, 0.5% jump to 60 to 89 DPD, and that's the other delinquency status. And here it will get interesting. 0.25% jump straight from, if you can see, from clean to 90 to 120, 119 DPD. 0.25% straight. But 0.5% of a clean portfolio slips straight into the danger. And that's the real risk hiding in your portfolio. These 0.5%. So roll rates aren't just about measuring the steady decay. They are about catching the outliers, the account whose behavior changes suddenly and dramatically. Now the continuation step of the last one, the 0 to 29 DPD cohort. And this is where the roll rate analysis becomes revealing. The 0 to 29 DPD bucket is the battleground. Accounts here can go either direction. Some cure, some deteriorate. And this cohort shows you the behavioral split that the regulators miss. The recovery side, the roll backward or the cured state. 40% of the accounts got cured and returned to the clean state, and these borrowers got cash or maybe caught up with enough payments and disappeared back into the performing status. The deterioration state is that the 35% approx accounts stayed at the 0 to 29 DPD, and these accounts didn't cure, but they didn't worsen either. 15% of the accounts they got a little progress to 30 to 59 DPD, and now you are seeing the genuine stress. If you can see the tail risk, the 2.5%, this straight away went to 90 to 119 DPD, and rest to 0.8 is in the 120 plus DPD bucket. So from the critical insight perspective, if you see of those the 6,000 of the accounts which are in 0 to 29 DPD, 40% got cured, 60% got deteriorated or stayed stuck. The 60% figure is your early warning, and these accounts are the candidates for intervention or restructuring or loss. So if you define the default at 90 DPD, you miss the first 6 months of warning signals. But if you track the 0 to 29 DPD behavior, you see the deterioration path forming. So accounts that don't cure at 0 to 29 DPD are 60 times more likely to default than the accounts that do so. Now let's build the migration matrix. So you have tracked the individual cohorts 1 month at a time, and now you need to consolidate all of them into a single matrix. And this is the complete picture of how your portfolio moves month to month. And rows are where the accounts start, and columns are where they end up. So pick any starting line in the left column and follow across. So if you start clean, you have 89% chance of staying clean, 8% chance of moving to 0 to 29 DPD, 2% to 30 to 59 DPD, and small percentages flowing into the deeper buckets. The diagonal 89% is your persistence, accounts that don't move. And if you start with 0 to 29 DPD, you have 40% chance of curing back to clean, 35% of staying into that put condition, 15% chance of rolling forward to 30 to 59 DPD, and the other smaller percentages. Notice the split. Recovery is 40% versus the deterioration is the 60%. Similarly, you can get started with other DPD stages. If you start with 90 to 119 DPD, you have only 2% chance of curing back to clean, 8% chance of partial improvement, but 40% chance of staying stuck, and 13% chance of rolling forward to the 120 plus DPD near the right of stage. If you can look at the three zones on the right, the green zone and in the migration matrix as well, the green tints, it shows the roll backward, the cured state. It means that the accounts are improving. Notice how this triangle shrinks as you go deeper into the delinquency. Clean accounts have lots of cures. 120 plus accounts have almost none. The upper right triangle, the orange and the red tints, they show the roll forward, the deterioration. Accounts worsening, and this triangle grows as you go deeper. Clean accounts rarely jump the multiple buckets, and the 90 plus DPD accounts frequently deteriorate. The critical finding is that if you look at the 90 to 119 DPD row, 40% stays at this same DPD stage only, and 30% roll to the 120 plus DPD, and combining that the 53% of the accounts that don't cure, and only 2% returns to clean. And this is your true default threshold, and this is where the recovery probability collapse. So regulatory definition says the default at 90 DPD. Your data confirms it that the account hairs don't come back. So have you ever thought about why this matrix matters? This matters because it's a complete behavioral model of your portfolio. And from there, you will feed this into a Markov chain forecast and you can then project. In 6 months, what will your portfolio delinquency look like? And it's your crystal ball for the loss forecasting. Now let's understand the roll backward and the roll forward rates. From any delinquency buckets, the account that flow in two directions. They either improve or they either worsen. These two metrics are opposite. They tell you the complete story of the portfolio behavior and critically where the default actually lives. So roll backward, it measures the recovery, the cure rate. It's the sum of all the accounts moving to less risky buckets. So if you are in 60 to 89 DPD, rolling backward means moving to 30 to 59 DPD, 0 to 29 DPD or clean, and it's an improvement. So this what it tells you. This tells you if a borrower in this bucket self-cure. Early buckets, they have high roll backward rates. 40 to 50% of the accounts cure themselves through normal payment behavior. Late buckets have very low roll backward rates and maybe 2 to 10% only, and this is the signal. Healthy portfolios show high roll backward in early stages and rapidly falling roll backward in the late stages. Now roll forward. This measures the worsening, the deterioration rate. It's the sum of all accounts moving to the riskier buckets. So if you are in a 0 to 29 DPD, rolling forward means moving to 30 to 59 or 60 to 89 and so on. Basically, it's a deterioration. This tells us how many borrowers in this bucket are heading towards the loss. And early buckets have low forward rates. Most borrowers either stay put or cure. But late buckets have high roll forward rates. Accounts are accelerating towards the write-off. So why these two metrics define the default? Basically, this crossover point is our answer. We find the bucket where the roll backward falls below the 10% and roll forwards exceeds 25%. And that's where the recovery probability collapses and loss probability dominates. And that's a true default threshold. In earlier migration metrics, we saw 90 to 119 DPD had only 2% of the roll backward and 13% roll forward to 120 plus DPD. And that's the point of no return. So don't defend your default based on this regulation. Defend it based on these curves and show auditors that at 190 plus DPD, cure probability drops below 5% and loss probability exceeds 50%. And that's empirically where default occurs in your portfolio. Now let's understand the setup. Suppose that you have 2000 of customers in the 30 to 59 DPD bucket at month 12. 1 month passes, so where did they go? Pull that row from your migration metrics and then calculate the roll backward calculation and also the roll forward calculation. From there, you will see that 50% is the roll backward one and 15% is the roll forward one. In actual, 15% of these 2000 customers is 300 of the customers they got worsened. And 50% of this 2000 customers is like that 1000 of the customers they got cured. Right? So if we talk about this 15%, this means that they missed another payment cycle or two. And they are now deeper in the delinquency and closer to the default. So the 30 to 59 DPD bucket is the decision point here. Half the borrowers here will recover, but rest will not. 15% are on their way to default, and 35% they got stuck, neither recovering nor worsening. They are just sitting there. And your collection team should focus on the 50% of the cure rate because it's a proof that intervention works at this stage. But recognize that the 15% will deteriorate regardless of whatever you do, and that's your expected loss segment. Notice that this 30 to 59 DPD bucket has a 50% of cure rate, and that's a meaningful recovery. Accounts at 90 plus DPD are losses waiting to happen. Now let's determine the default threshold. We need to find the delinquency bucket where roll backward drops below a certain threshold, and that's your empirical point of no return. We scan our buckets across each stages. We then calculate the roll backward and roll forward rates, and then we interpret. Now here, if you see that the 0 to 29 DPD delinquency bucket, it has a good curing potential. Whereas if you see why, because at this stage you can see 40% can go back to the cleaner stage. But if you look at 90 to 120 119 DPD, 50% 53% of the customers have a chance of roll forward, that is they have the chance of more worsening stage, and this marks the point of no return. So what if your 90 to 119 DPD bucket had a 35% roll backward and only 12% of roll forward? Then your default definition or threshold would be 120 DPD and not the 90 DPD, because in here only this bucket has 53%, the highest roll forward rate, and that is why it becomes the point of no return. But if it changes to, let's say, only 12% of roll forward, then 90 plus DPD will not be your default definition and 120 plus DPD will become. Now let's visualize the optimal default point, a single curve that tells us the entire story. Roll backward percentage on the y-axis, delinquency buckets on the x-axis, and as the accounts age, the cure probability drops, and that's what we have seen from the previous table. The sharp drop between 60 to 89 and 90 to 119 is all what we have to look at. We can see a very short gap, and roll backward here, it just got from 28% to only 10%. A 65% collapse in just one bucket. And that's not just a gradual deterioration, that's a cliff. Accounts at 90 DPD, they behave fundamentally different from accounts at 89 DPD. And this is why the 90 DPD is the regulatory standard. And if you run this analysis for different products like mortgages or auto loans or credit cards, you will get different curves. And that's the insight the regulators respect. If you granularly calculate the numbers and then read through the chart, and then you finalize all the conclusion. Now since you have built the migration matrix, now let's use it as a time machine. And instead of looking backward at what happened, look forward at what will happen. And the Markov property says that tomorrow's portfolio state, it depends only on today's state and not the history. And that's a very simple math version. Your migration matrix is M, the transition operator. Your current portfolio distribution is D, like how many accounts in each bucket right now. And after 1 month, then you calculate D of T plus 1. Then similarly D2 and D3 and so on. And we then projected the portfolio for the next 3 months. And then the projected 90 plus DPD here, if you see in the example, this pool grows from 1000 to 2500 plus in just 3 months. And don't worry, we'll see this in our Excel example as well once all the slides got covered. I just want you to give a thorough understanding so that you can link all these steps. So basically, this forecast feeds your lifetime ECL calculations, and here you are not just measuring the PD today, but you are measuring the PD's trajectory, and that's what the provisioning under IFRS 9 and CECL demands, the forward-looking loss expectations. Now let's understand the key takeaways. First is the migration matrix, which is the engine. A single transition table compresses every cohort level behavior, like cure, persistence, or deterioration, into one analyzable structure. Next is the roll backward, which locates the default. We need to find the bucket where roll backward drops, and that's our empirical point of no return. When auditors challenge your default definition, you don't just defend the Basel, you defend your portfolio's behavior. Next is the roll forward, which drives the collection strategy. This roll forward deterioration tells you where the buckets are losing the accounts fast, and high roll forward means accounts are accelerating towards the write-off. And that's where to concentrate the collections effort, not where the regulation says, but where your data says the losses are forming. Next is the Markov power, the matrix for forecasting. Raising the migration matrix to the nth power projects the portfolio default levels n number of months ahead. The foundation of IFRS 9 or CECL, the ECL pipelines. So divide your portfolio by the origination cohort, loans originated in Jan, Feb, March, etc. And for each cohort, track the same delinquency progression independently. Observe them over timelines like 6 months on book, 12 months on book, 18, 24, and so on, and watch each cohorts, what exactly are they telling regarding the roll rates? Now let's understand the vintage analysis. This core concept, this tells us what exactly it is telling us. It is a step-by-step procedure to track the loan performance by origination cohort, right? And the and we this question, let's say, can you answer this question? The loans that are open in January 2023, are they riskier than the loans that are opened in March? So basically, it basically tracks the performance by month or the quarter of the origination. And it will answer, is the chosen default threshold stable across the cohorts? So this vintage analysis, this gives us three main building blocks: cohort, which is our grouping; months on books, which is our timeline; and the cumulative default rate, which is our metric to calculate. For each cohort at the MOB, we calculate what share of this cohort has defaulted by the age. Have you ever thought about why this structure matters? This is because you can't just answer the question that whether the loans that are in January, they are riskier than March or not. But isolating by cohort and watching each one aging independently can suddenly tell you regarding the patterns. And that's why it matters so much for the default definition. Different origination cohorts can carry different default patterns, and vintage analysis lets us confirm whether this threshold that we have chosen, is it behaving consistently across the cohorts, or is it needs a revisit. So basically, we need to validate the default threshold. This exposes the underwriting drift as well, and it defines the performance window. So we need to identify the MOB at which this behavior is stabilizing. Right now, the right outcome can be good for the model development. Integrates with roll rate analysis. So basically, the roll rate analysis says like 90 plus default, let's say, has 10% of cure probability, and that's your threshold. But vintage analysis asks, do these cohorts actually default at 90 DPD in practice? And for this, you plot the default rates by cohort. So if the curve accelerates at 90 DPD across multiple cohorts, you have your answer. And if they diverge, the roll rate say 90 DPD, but vintage curve show the defaults accelerating at, let's say, 105 DPD, you need to investigate this transparency, right? Both cannot tell you the different picture. Both needs to align and should give you the one single definition. Now these 9 steps end to end. The framework, the vintage analysis, isn't just a calculation, it's a 9-step process that builds from raw cohort data to risk adjusted performance window. And each step depends upon the previous one. Step 1, 2, 3 talks about the data preparation. Step 4, 5, 6 talks about the analysis. And step 7, 8, 9 talks about the refinement. So first, let's talk about the selecting the cohorts. So basically, you are grouping loans by the origination date, and the question is how granular: monthly, quarterly, annually. The choice drives everything downstream. If you pick wrong, then you will either lose the signal or you will go deeper into the noise. Next, you will calculate the months on books, the timeline framework. Here, you just cannot compare the cohorts unless you measure them at identical ages. For each cohort, you observe the performance at consistent milestones, and the identical MOB checkpoints make every cohort directly comparable on the same time axis. And why these checkpoints? Fixed milestones make defaults at the same MOB comparable across the cohorts. And without this, the calendar effects just masquerade as a risk signal. So you need to choose your checkpoint very carefully. Now the anchor point inside. MOB 24 is typically where the unsecured consumer defaults flatten. Beyond that, you are mostly just watching the time lapse. And this is your performance window anchor. The MOB where you can confidently say the default behavior is mature and reliable. You then compute the cumulative default rate. Because it answers of all the loans in the cohort, what percentage has defaulted by this age, and it's cumulative. You are not counting only defaults this month, but all the defaults from the origination through the checkpoint, and it's the total loss picture at this point. Now you need to build the vintage analysis table, where the rows are the MOB checkpoints, and each cell in this cumulative default rate at that cohort age is the intersection. And this is your complete vintage picture in one table. You read the data across each of the quarterly periods, and then the vintage across this. So basically, this quarter Q1 2023 cohort tells you that only 0.4% defaulted by 6 MOB, 6th month of MOB, rising to 4.2% by 36 MOB. If you look at the column down, first column down, and Q3 stands out. Q3 2023, it stands out. 4.1% at 24 MOB versus you can see that 3.2% for Q1. And that's a material gap at the same maturity. Next, you plot the vintage curves that you are calculating. 5 lines, one cohort per period, and each showing the cumulative default as it progresses through MOB from 0 to 36. The x-axis is the time and the y-axis is the cumulative loss. And each curve tells the story of one cohort lifestyle. And you need to understand that the reading the curves is very important. Here, all the curves are steep but relatively close together. Defaults accumulate as borrowers hit the early payment shocks, and most cohorts are in 1 to 2% of the range at MOB 12. There is a bit of stabilization zone. You can see the shaded part. The curves here are visibly flattened, and the rates of the default accumulation here, it is bit slowing. Now the stabilization signal is where the all curves are beginning to flatten, that we have discussed, and this confirms your earlier decision. MOB 24 is the anchor point that we have discussed, right? Now we need to analyze the shape of the curves. The absolute numbers matter here, but the shape tells you what's really happening. A curve that rises slowly and then plateauing is healthy. A curve that spikes late or zigzags is a red flag. So basically, the shape reveals the analogy, right? What exactly the curves are telling us regarding our portfolio, whether it's a healthy portfolio or some actionable is needed at a particular cohort. Now we need to determine the optimal performance window, the stability test. The core question is that at what MOV does the default behavior stop changing materially? And before that point, you are still learning. And after that point, you are just watching the time pass. That crossover is your performance window, your outcome horizon for the model development. So the stability formula is that the percentage change is CDR x plus 6 minus of CDR at x divided by CDR of x multiplied by 100. You are measuring how much it changes over, let's say, 6 months window. And that's what you do this by putting everything in the formula at the 6 months before, and then you calculate the percentage change for each of the MOB difference. And that's what you compare. Your output performance will tell you which MOB would be good to measure. And here it is coming out as MOB is equal to 24. That is the percentage of change is maximum at the 24 MOB. Okay, so now you need to cross check the default definition. So you have defined the default at 90 plus DPD using the roll rate analysis. Vintage analysis can validate or challenge that choice. But do cohorts actually default at 90 DPD, or does the real inflection point lies elsewhere? This step will tells you regarding the definition. So the procedure is that you need to recalculate your 90 plus DPD definition. So instead of using your original default definition, whatever it was, recalculate the cumulative default rates using only the accounts that hit 90 plus DPD. And this isolates the behavior of accounts specifically in the regulatory default bucket. And for each cohort at each MOB checkpoint, count what percentage of this cohort has reached 90 plus DPD status by this age. Then you need to plot the curves. So since now you have a newer vintage table and new curves all based on the 90 plus DPD as the default trigger, plot these curves on the same point. Here you are asking, do cohorts follow the same maturation pattern when I use 90 plus DPD specifically? Also, you need to check the parallelism across the cohorts, and this is the critical test. You need to compare the shape and spread of your 90 plus DPD curves against the curves from your overall definition. On the right, you have the cumulative percentage at 90 plus DPD, the table. And why this matters? You did roll rate analysis and found that 90 DPD is where the cure probability collapse. Good, but roll rate is based on the transition behavior. And does it actually predict where accounts default in practice? So vintage analysis answers that question using the real cumulative outcomes. So the cross-check power is that the roll rate analysis says that this is where the recovery collapse, but vintage analysis says that this is where the default actually occur in practice. And when both the methods they point out to 90 DPD, you have a bulletproof validation, and that's what you will show to your auditors. Like two independent methodologies, roll rates and the vintage curves, both confirm 90 DPD as the default threshold, and this definition is empirically sound and you can justify. Now the risk adjusted performance window selection. So the core principle is that the MOB24 is the standard recommendation, but standard does not mean the universal. Different products and risk segments mature at different speeds, and your vintage curve should tell you the actual stabilization point for your specific portfolio, and that's the window you use, and not just what the regulation says, not what the competitors use, but what your data shows. So for high risk segments, these products default fast. Borrowers in financial distress, they deteriorate quickly and they miss one payment, then another, and then hit default within the months. Your vintage curves for this segment probably show early stabilization. For the low risk segments, these products default slowly. A prime borrower with a mortgage has a month of cash reserves, equity cushion, and strong credit history. They don't default on impulse. Defaults accumulate gradually over the years. And your vintage curves probably show continued material change well past the MOB24. So the rule of thumb is that let the vintage curves dictate the window and not just the portfolio convention. So the key takeaways from the vintage analysis, let's discuss that. First is the cohort comparability, comes from the shared MOB checkpoints. So basically you can't compare the cohorts unless you measure them at identical ages. And that's why the quarterly cohorts with fixed MOB observations are essential. These shared milestones eliminate the calendar noise and let you isolate true risk differences between the origination periods. And without these fixed checkpoints, you are comparing apples to oranges, and that should not be the case. You need to read the curve shape before comparing the absolute levels, because a curve shape tells you more than its numbers. Healthy curves are smooth and parallel, and they rise steadily then plateau. Problem curves spike late or zigzag, or they can diverge sharply as well. You should use the less than 10% rule to set your performance window. Don't use MOB24 just because it's standard. Measure percentage change in the CDR that we have seen previously between the consecutive MOB windows. And when that change drops below 10%, your cohort has stabilized. And that's your outcome horizon, the age at which the default behavior is mature and reliable. Last is the vintage analysis, which validates and refines the default definition. So as we discussed, the roll rate analysis identified 90 DPD as your default threshold. Vintage analysis tests it. So plot the 90 plus cumulative 90 plus DPD rates for each cohort, and if the resulting curves run parallel and stable across the cohorts, you have proven your definition that it works consistently. And if they diverge or spike, your definition drifts and you need to adjust it. Now that we have discussed our key takeaways, let's go through an integrated example which helps us in setting the default definition. This is a complete journey, and this example shows how roll rate analysis and vintage analysis work together to produce a defensible default definition. So first step is to find the roll rate analysis. which is our threshold measuring. Here we are tracking an auto loan portfolio delinquency transitions, and the results are as follows. At 0 to 29 DPD, 45% roll backward. This means that here the cure rate is strong. At 30 to 59 DPD, 38% roll backward. So this means that it is still recovering. At 60 to 89 DPD, 22% roll backward. This means that recovery is now starting to weaken. At 90 to 119 DPD, you can see that there is only 8% of threshold. That is the roll backward rate. And that's what we are looking at a threshold. Why? Because first of all, it has satisfied the criteria of less than 10. And that means that there is this is the least of all the above. And then from there, we can say that there is a point of no return. And this is our candidate threshold. Accounts here are point of no return. Next step is to compute the vintage analysis for the validation purpose. Now measure the same portfolio by the origination cohort. Calculate cumulative 90 plus DPD rates across the multiple quarters. And then find the CDR at the 90 plus DPD, which is consistent across all the cohorts. The curves are parallel and stable, and the 90 plus DPD definition captures the default behavior consistently across all the origination periods. And vintage analysis confirms the roll rate finding. The bonus insight is that the curves stabilize around the 18 to 24 MOB. The percentage change between the MOB 18 and the MOB 24 is roughly the 30 to 40% hike. And between the MOB 24 and MOB 30, it drops below 10%. So your performance window is MOB 24, the age at which the auto loan default behavior matures. Now the final decision comes up. Since we have completed the analytical journey, we declare the default as 90 plus days past due or the reasonable doubt of repayment. And have you ever thought why this definition is defensible? Because of first the roll rate evidence that we have computed, the vintage confirmation in the step 2, also the regulatory alignment that from step 1 and step 2 we are also aligning our definition with the regulators. Like Basel 3 says 90 plus DPD is default, and our empirical evidence also confirms that. Also the performance window. The curve stabilizes at MOB 24 and you have now reliable outcome data by that age. And your PD models are built that on mature, stable and performance signals. So basically, the each step from the evidence A, evidence B, and the calibration 1, it everything aligns to our proper definition. So you can say to your auditor or from the regulator's perspective, you can say that you have conducted a thorough analysis to find out the definition, and you can then show the evidences, the visualization, the charts, the results, and that's how you convince the regulators regarding your definition. Now let's connect everything back to the ECL formula. Since you have spent considerable effort defining the default rigorously using the roll rates and the vintage analysis, now you see why that definition is the foundation of your entire ECL calculation. Once you get that right and everything downstream is credible, and you get that wrong, every provision and every reserve, every regulatory submission is compromised. So first step is to calculate the PD. Since you have a default definition which tells you which accounts are at risk, you using that your 24 months performance window from the vintage analysis, you measure of all the loans originated, of all the loans that you have originated, what percentage of from those accounts reach 90 plus DPD by MOB 24. And that's your historical default rate. That becomes your probability of default input. Next, you plug them into the ECL formula. Your PD from step 1 is anchored on the same default definition as your LGD and EAD. All these three components, they are aligned to the same default threshold, and this alignment is critical for IFRS 9 and CECL compliance. Last is the accurate ECL calculation. Since your PD is grounded in the empirical default observation, here your ECL is defensible, and you are not just pulling out of PD out of thin air or accepting the regulatory minimums. You are measuring it from your portfolio's actual behavior that you have analyzed. Now, why this default definition is at the hinge? Have you ever thought about that? Default definition sits always at the foundation. Everything flows from it. If your definition is loose, your PD will be artificially high and your ECL will be overstated. Because of that, your provisions will be excessive. But if your definition is too tight, your PD will be artificially low, your ECL will be understated, and your provisions will be insufficient. So only if your definition is empirically calibrated, grounded in where the recovery actually collapsed in your portfolio, this will your PD and ECL. Because of that, only after these measures will be accurate. Let's discuss the practical tips and challenges. So first is the insufficient historical data. Because the problem is that we need at least 24 months of account level history to build the reliable vintage curves. But our portfolio, let's say if it is new or our data system goes back only 18 months, then you are short. Then you need to use the expert judgment and comparable benchmarks as the interim proxies. And if you have 18 months of internal data, supplement them with the industry benchmarks for months 19 to 24. Next is the economic cycle sensitivity. Vintage curves shift materially during the downturns and the recoveries. Cohorts originated in 2020, the pandemic shock period, look completely different from what we have in, let's say, 2022, which is the recovery time. So, which curves represent your true default threshold? That's an ambiguity. So, for this, you need to run the stress testing across multiple macroeconomic scenarios and plot the vintage curves for the base conditions, the normal conditions, the adverse case, and the severity case as well. And then you should ask if the DPD threshold shifts from 90 to 110 during a downturn, how would the ECL change? And then you need to quantify that sensitivity. Next is the portfolio mix changes. Your origination channels, loan amounts, geographies, or credit tiers, they shift over time. Quarter 1 2023 cohort was 70% unsecured, but Quarter 3 2023 cohort is only 40% unsecured. So this mixed contamination makes your cohorts non-comparable. So for this, you need to run the separate vintage analysis by segment, and you will find each segment has its own maturation curve and optimal threshold. And the most important point is that once you figure out all these changes, you need to document them. Document them explicitly so that once the auditors came up, you have the evidence, whatever the findings you have related to those cohorts. Seasonal patterns. The year-ending spending, the tax refunds, and the seasonal employment, they create the predictable delinquency spikes. A cohort's default rate at, let's say, January MOB 13, which includes the holiday spending month, looks worse than the April MOB 13, which is the post-refund times. So is this difference real default or just seasonality drift? The solution here is that you need to have the average vintage curves across the multiple years. Pool all the January cohorts together and pool all the April cohorts together. And the multi-year average smooths out one of the seasonal noise while preserving the true trend signals. Last is the restructured or the forbearance loans. Suppose that a borrower can't pay. You restructure the debt, extend the term, and reduce the rate. So technically they have triggered the unlikely to pay. But are they defaulted or cured? Because the regulator definition says the default, but your data says the recovery. And only this ambiguity contaminates your analysis. So for this, you need to track the restructured loans separately and exclude them from your default definition during the forbearance period. Now let's quickly discuss the 5 best practices. First is the annual definition review. Refresh the default definition each year using the latest portfolio data and regulator guidance. Cross-business consistency. Maintain a single harmonized definition across the product lines wherever the risk profile allows. Formal policy documentation. Capture every assumption, exception, and rationale in a board-approved default policy. Threshold stress testing. Quantify the sensitivity. What if the DPD threshold shifts from 90 to 60 or 120 days? You need to figure out that. Segment the specific thresholds. Calibrate the distinct cutoffs for secured versus unsecured, retail versus SME, where the data justifies that. So basically, a robust default definition is data-driven, documented, dynamic, reviewed regularly, stress tested rigorously, and segmented intelligently. It's not a one-time definition, it's a living framework which evolves with your portfolio, with your economy, and through the regulatory guidance. And that's what separates the defensible definitions from regulatory checkbox filling. Let's bring all together what we have discussed. So basically, we have traveled from the raw delinquency data to a defensible default definition. The journey required two complementary analytical lenses, and each revealing the different truths about our portfolio. First is the roll rate analysis, which identifies the point of no return. And typically 90 plus DPT is the where the probability of rolling backward drops below the 10%. Next is the vintage analysis, which validates that the chosen default definition is stable and consistent across the different origination cohorts and time periods. And together, this becomes a defensible definition. Combining these two methods deliver a data-driven audit-ready default definition. Here, you are not defending 90 DPT because regulation says so. You are defending it because the roll rate show recovery collapses there, and the vintage curves confirms that the cohorts consistently default at that threshold across multiple origination periods. And that's the triangulation and which makes our definition the bulletproof. So if you look at the 5 steps below, first you need to figure out the default definition, which we have defined when the loan is becoming default. Then you need to estimate the PD using the performance window definition from the vintage analysis. Then compute the ECL using the formula where you plug your PD anchored to your definition into the ECL equation alongside with the LTD and EAD. Then you have your loan loss reserves because ECL translate directly into the provisions under the IFRS 9 and CECL. Lastly, the capital and the P&L. The reserves impact regulatory capital ratios, reported profitably, and shareholder equity. A seemingly small change to when is a loan defaulted cascades into the material capital and the earning impacts. So, the real consequence is that a loose default definition, like we discussed, they inflates the PD and inflates the ECL, inflates the reserves and compresses the reported earnings. Your profitability looks artificially weak. A tight definition does the opposite. It's under the reserves and overstates the earning. Regulators see hidden risk, and only a calibrated, empirically grounded definition balances the accuracy with credibility. And that's what you have built. So that's all for today. If you have found this video useful and if it has added value to your learnings, please like, share and subscribe my channel for more updates on credit risk modeling, and stay tuned to my channel for 100 days of ECL Mastery series. What's coming up next is the risk staging under the IFRS 9. Now that you have a robust default definition, the next frontier is understanding how the loans flow through the IFRS 9 3 stages framework. Your default definition is the hard boundary between the stage 2 and 3. Understanding how the borrowers migrate through these stages and what triggers each transition is the next step in the comprehensive credit risk management. Default definition isn't a regulatory compliance checkbox, it's the architectural decision that shapes everything downstream. PD models, ECL calculations, reserve adequacy, capital ratios, earning reportings, and the ultimately shareholder value. So we need to spend the time to get it right. So drop your comments so that I can know how useful this video is to you. And see you in the next one. Thank you.